Negar Mortazavi, a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. She joins us live now from Rome. Negar, thank you so much for being with us. I mean, Jeremy, one of our correspondents there, Alexander Marquardt, was just touching on the fact that, you know, there isn't necessarily a huge amount of optimism that this cessation in hostilities between Israel and Lebanon could actually pave the way or could actually lead to an increase in appetite for a cessation of hostilities between Israel and Gaza. Just give us your take on that.
I see this as a first step, as a good first step. I mean, I share Alex's skepticism that we're hearing in Western capitals, also across the region. But nevertheless, the fact that I would see this as a major concession on the part of Hezbollah and the so-called axis of resistance, with Iran being a major player in all of this, because for almost the past year, everything that was happening across the region on multiple fronts was coupled together. And the talking point was that without a ceasefire in Gaza, a stopping of the war in Gaza, this wouldn't happen. So the fact that this was decoupled, I would say, is a concession on that side. This war also took a major toll on Lebanon. Over 3,000 people already killed, many civilians, children, 1 million displaced in a country that's dealing with a lot of economic, political turmoil. So it wasn't a very popular situation. And so the fact that this was decoupled and the ceasefire was delivered, or the cessation at least, I think is welcome news, is a good first step. Now, it depends on how much the two sides, the parties, can make sort of meet somewhere halfway to reach the same in Gaza, and also how much the United States is willing to use its leverage, at least on one of the parties, to push for that ceasefire in Gaza.
Yeah, because Hamas now knows that Hezbollah isn't necessarily coming to its aid anymore. I want to talk about what happens after the 60-day period is over. I mean, obviously, it's a temporary ceasefire at this point in time, but what will determine whether or not this actually ends up leading to a permanent cessation of hostilities?
Well, so the terms are basically going to unfold over the next 2 months or 60 days. Israeli forces are going to gradually pull out of Lebanon, and the various parameters of the deal are going to be observed by a committee. The U.S. is going to mediate and bring the two sides together to sort of seal this as a permanent ceasefire. And there have been ceasefires in the past that did hold for a while. And in fact, the one between Hezbollah and Israel, the previous one, which it is very similar actually to what was just detailed in this ceasefire. And it was only after October 7th and the war in Gaza started that Hezbollah sort of entered the conflict with Israel. So I'm optimistic that there is a high potential this can hold if obviously both parties abide by the terms of them. And I think there's a will to abide by it, considering, as we saw, that communities had to leave their homes and their villages on the border. So the will and I think the necessity on both sides exists, but this is also still not completely decoupled from Gaza. I think how the situation unfolds in Gaza, if it's moving towards an actual ceasefire, end of the war, or if it's going to escalate, that will determine this. And also Israel and Iran, the direct confrontation that's been blowing up a couple of times in the past year, going to have an impact on all of this. So all of the pieces are still connected to each other.
I do want to talk about, I mean, obviously, you know, we've touched on what Hezbollah has to gain from this deal. I mean, obviously, they've been dramatically weakened over the past few months. But just in terms of what Israel has to gain, talk to us about what they have to gain beyond the obvious. Netanyahu has come out and said that this will give Israel a chance to sort of rebuild its stockpile of weapons and also focus and turn its attention to its other main threat, which is, of course, Iran.
Well, I think one of the main factors, like key factor for Israel, was the fact that tens of thousands of Israeli citizens, residents had to leave their communities, their homes on the border. And this was the case on the Lebanese side as well. Essentially, the human toll, the civilian toll of the war on both sides of the border. And that was the factor that the Israelis were emphasizing, the security of these communities and their ability to return to their homes. So I think that's important, and also to be able to sort of continue that security and make sure that the attacks don't come again from southern Lebanon, which is also, again, mirroring that on the other side of the border is what Lebanese communities on the southern border of Lebanon are looking at. But then at the same time, I think this all ties into the election result in the U.S. The region, Iran certainly, and its allies, these non-state actors, are watching U.S. politics very closely. Less than 2 months of the Biden administration, and the Trump administration is going to come in with a completely different doctrine on the Middle East. Yes, the talking point is that he's going to be the president of peace, is going to make deals, but how true that's going to be, how possible, and what it's going to look like for the different parties, for the Palestinians, for the Lebanese, for the Iranians, I think it remains to be seen, and that's something that everyone in the region is watching for the next 2 months. And in January, essentially, I think we're going to have more answers as to what direction the region is going to go based on the new U.S. policy being.
Yeah, because it's interesting timing, isn't it? Because the 60-day temporary ceasefire comes to an end just as Donald Trump is inaugurated. Just in terms of something else that you just mentioned there, that the fact that one of the impetus for this war was, of course, ensuring that Israelis who had been evacuated from their homes in northern Israel would be able to go back. I mean, a lot of Israelis simply do not trust that Hezbollah is going to live up to their side of the bargain here. I mean, do you anticipate that in this 60-day period there will be a number of Israelis who do return to their homes in the north?
Well, I think that's a legitimate concern that communities are going to have, but at the same time, I don't think the Lebanese, even though the ceasefire, the terms of the deal have been decoupled from Gaza, I don't think that the situation, how that war unfolds in Gaza, is going to be completely unrelated to the activities of Hezbollah and other Iran allies. So let's say if the war escalates in Gaza, or if no movement towards ceasefire happens, no hope for the new Trump administration to make the deal that they're promising, the peace and sort of ending the wars, and I think things can look differently. Also, Hezbollah has taken a lot of essentially massive hits with the assassination of their head, the top echelons of the organization. This is going to give both sides time to regroup and essentially reorganize themselves if they want, and prepare for potentially the steps if things don't go the way that they want in January. So it's not a permanent ceasefire, it's a 60-day cessation of hostilities, but I'm optimistic that if the promise of peace and deal making by the Trump administration is going to actually be something that they will pursue in January, that this would just be one step in the right direction and eventually end to a permanent one.
Well, we shall see, as you say. Negar Mortazavi, live for us. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Israel says